Have you ever had a moment of clarity? Like something just clicked, one of those aha moments, only to realize later that you were still missing the point? Maybe you said the right words or you took the right step, but deep down your assumptions hadn't really changed. That's where we find the disciples in this scene. Peter finally puts it into words. Jesus, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's the moment that they've been building toward. Everybody, you can imagine all the disciples around are like, wow, he really said it out loud. But almost instantly it becomes clear, even though they're using the right vocabulary to describe Jesus, they're still trapped in the wrong framework. What's up, everybody? I'm Tyson Putoff. This is scene 16 of the JesusX30 challenge. And in this episode, we're going to follow Jesus into some of the most intense and eye-opening moments of his campaign in the northern area of the Galilee. From purity debates and Gentile miracles to mountains of glory, and he rebukes Satan. And this scene is all about refinement. The previous scene was about sifting, where Jesus thinned out his following of disciples. And now he starts to refine things, because from here on out, it's just going to get more intense, more dangerous, and he needs to have full assurance that his disciples are ready for what's ahead. But this scene also is going to force you and me to ask, what assumptions are we still holding on to even after we've confessed who Jesus is? Even after we claim to follow him and believe in him? What assumptions are we still holding about him that may not align with who he really is? So there are moments in any movement when the heat really gets turned up, when clarity comes not through calm explanations, but through pressure, when something gets burned away and what's left is either real or not, right? And that's exactly what's happening in this scene. Jesus is beginning to separate those who are drawn to the kingdom from those who are still clinging to systems and expectations that can't survive the fire. This isn't about theology or miracles anymore. This is about refinement, and it's personal. So we're still in the Galilee, technically the northern edges of it, near the borderlands around the sea, just before Jesus makes his final turn south toward Jerusalem. And at this point in the campaign, things are heating up. The crowds have grown. Jesus has sifted them, so he's still got some really fired up followers around him. The tensions are growing with the religious authorities and political authorities, and they're nearing a boiling point. And now the disciples are about to be pushed into a deeper understanding of what this whole thing is really about. And it all begins with a confrontation about purity. The Pharisees come to Jesus with a challenge. They've noticed that his disciples are eating without performing the proper hand washing rituals. It's not a matter of hygiene, but it's a ritual of cleanness. And in their world, these traditions weren't optional, really. They had become the markers of covenant faithfulness. So they demonstrated that you were one of God's people. And especially under Roman oppression, maintaining these types of purity laws had become a way to preserve identity and to resist assimilation into the broader worldly cultures of the time. We do this because it helps us stay and look and identify as different from everyone else. So it made sense on that level. So when Jesus doesn't play along, the leaders see it as more than disrespect, but this is a threat to their own identity and survival as a people more broadly. And Jesus' response is direct and devastating, and he quotes Isaiah, and he accuses them of honoring God with their lips while their hearts are far away. And then he turns the whole purity system inside out, and he tells the crowd that it's not what goes into a person that defiles them, but what comes out. What matters isn't what you eat or touch, it's about what you harbor in your heart and how you treat others. Okay, this is the theme of his entire message and public campaign. For us, that sounds obvious, right? Especially Christianized world. We look at all these rituals that the Jewish people did in Jesus' day, and we criticize them as being what we call legalistic, right? That term sound familiar? But in that setting, that's not what this is about. And it's not Jesus criticizing the rituals themselves, because Jesus himself performed most of the Jewish rituals. He didn't do some of them at key moments because he was trying to generate controversy like he is here. But Jesus was a Jewish man doing Jewish things, okay? So it wasn't that he was upset about. It was the way these were being used to oppress, to keep people out, to push people out who maybe didn't have the means, didn't have the right opportunities to do the rituals in the way that some expected them to do. And then those people were being pushed to the margins, or they were being kept out of the temple worship or kept out of the synagogues. And that's where Jesus says enough is enough. It's not about that. It's about how you treat people. It's about what's in your heart, because what's in your heart leads to how you treat people. So in that setting, what Jesus is doing is radical. And again, he's not just questioning traditions, he's dismantling an entire system of access to God. If what defiles a person comes from within, jealousy, greed, slander, pride, then purity isn't about staying separate from unclean things. It's about confronting what's broken inside ourselves and inside our culture and community. And that's not just a change in the rules, it's an entire redefinition of holiness itself. So Mark adds a line in his description of what's going on here that makes the implications even clearer. He writes, "Thus Jesus declared all foods clean." And that little sentence is huge. It signals a turning point. Jesus isn't building his movement on categories of clean and unclean, or one nationality versus another nationality, or one way of approaching God versus another way of approaching God, or sacred versus secular. He's creating an entirely new system in this moment. And he's not saying you can't practice this way. He never once says that. He's saying your way of practicing isn't the only way, is what he's saying. And he's saying if your way of practicing misrepresents God or prevents someone else from getting to God the way they're trying to do, then you're overstepping your bounds. And so he's basically creating a system, a new system, a new society, a new way of worshiping, a new way of going about being human. So right after this, Jesus puts this message into action. He leaves the Galilee and he enters into Gentile territory. He goes north toward Tyre and Sidon, which these are Phoenician cities on the coast. They're outside of the usual boundaries of his campaign. And in that region, he meets a woman, and she's Greek. She's Syrophoenician by background. And she comes to Jesus begging for help. She says, "My daughter is tormented by a demon." And in a moment of kind of a symbolic act, not a moment that demonstrates a lack of compassion, but instead it's sort of a symbolic act to make a statement to those who are around. Jesus sort of brushes her off at first. He says it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. And it's a pretty harsh line, and it's kind of uncomfortable to hear, and I've heard it misrepresented in some pretty bad ways. But this woman doesn't back down. That's part of the key to this interaction. And she says, "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the table." At that point, the whole conversation shifts. Jesus's approach to her and his demeanor shifts. And Jesus turns from making this kind of snide, harsh remark against her to praising her faith. And he says, "Hey, your daughter is healed." And something shifts, not just for her, but for the movement itself. That Gentile woman becomes the first person in this scene who fully understands the generosity of the kingdom. The elite had rejected Jesus over matters of hand washing. But this outsider, this foreign woman, this woman who's not one of us, she gets it. And Jesus honors her faith. And not only that, but he heals her daughter, delivers her from this demon. It's a powerful moment, and it's one that I think shows us something essential about how Jesus operates. He's not just crossing into Gentile territory geographically. He's expanding the kingdom's reach. He's showing his disciples, he's showing all of those who are following him and looking on that faith isn't about ethnicity, it's not about nationality, it's not about citizenship, it's not about status or ritual background or economic wealth or political affiliation. There are no boundaries that exist in Jesus' kingdom. And there are certainly no boundaries that we can establish to keep one person out or to push one person down or to separate Jesus from those who love him. And he says this woman's faith outshines all of yours. And from there, he goes on to travel through the region of what we call the Decapolis. It's another Gentile heavy area east of the sea, and he continues to heal. He opens ears. He restores the broken. The Gospels say the people were astonished beyond measure, and they don't just marvel at his power, they praise God because of what he's doing and because of Jesus. Even among the Gentiles, the works of Jesus are revealing the true nature of God. So these are people who don't follow the God of Israel, who now recognize the power and the reality of the God of Israel. And then in another moment that mirrors an earlier miracle, Jesus feeds another huge crowd. This time it's 4,000 people, and the details are different, and some of those matter. The first feeding had 12 baskets left over, which is symbolic maybe of the 12 tribes of Israel. This one has 7 baskets left over, which is a number often used in Jewish texts to refer to the fullness of the nations. Even the word for basket is different here than it was before. The Greek word spuris instead of kophinos, which is a type of basket typically used by non-Jews in Jesus' day. So the message that is being communicated here is pretty clear. This kingdom is for everyone. And Jesus isn't just saying it, he's enacting it. I think we as modern day Christian interpreters, we have to hear Jesus say it explicitly in order for us to say, okay, yeah. And even then, I would say we tend to ignore a lot of what Jesus says explicitly. But even when he doesn't, in a situation like this, he's actually enacting what he's trying to communicate to his followers, including us. And his disciples are still trying to catch up. They're understanding, but it's coming in stages. And Jesus seems to know that this is part of what he's dealing with in his campaign. It's this process of expansion and inclusion, and it's tension with the elite. And it's also just like trying to keep his disciples from just like throwing in the towel because it's too confusing. So if the earlier scenes showed Jesus as this provider and king, this scene is a fire. It's a testing ground. It's a place where a lot of the assumptions are continuing to be burned away, just like they were in the previous scene. What type of king is Jesus? He burned away a lot of assumptions and misunderstandings. Same thing is taking place here. And I think that is not just, well, look at the dumb disciples, they just can't get it. I think this speaks to us as well, because I think all of us carry around some version of the Pharisees' impulse. We all build systems. We all like systems that are already in place, whether those are religious systems in the form of your denomination or your tradition, political systems, whether that's Republican, Democrat, this or that political system, social systems. We like to hang out with people we know, and then we look at the others in the other crowds and we think, oh, they're different from us, so let's keep them at bay. And we like the systems that we're a part of, right? That's external systems, but we also have internal systems too. We draw lines around holiness, don't we? We like to make holiness something that I fit into, but that people who do things differently or look different from me or whatever it is, believe different from me, they don't do holiness quite like I do. We make lists about who qualifies for holiness and who fits and who doesn't. But Jesus keeps crossing those lines. He heals the wrong people. He praises the wrong people. He invites the wrong people in. And then he reminds his followers, and he reminds us too, that what really makes someone clean or unclean or a follower or not a follower isn't typically what we imagine it to be. It's not their background, it's their heart, it's their loyalty. The woman from Tyre got it. The crowds in the Decapolis knew this. But it's weird, but the disciples, the ones closest to Jesus, still don't get it. They still have to have their eyes opened. And Jesus will oblige them. That's what he's going to do next. They go on this kind of world tour, not really, but geographical, crossing some boundaries, and they come back to Bethsaida, back on the Jewish side of the lake. And some of the people bring a blind man to Jesus, begging him to touch him and heal him. And Jesus does something a little unusual. He takes the man outside of the village, away from the crowd. And this is interesting. This is the only two-stage healing in the entire Gospels. You remember this story? So Jesus spits on the man's eyes, he lays hands on him, and he asks, do you see anything? And the man answers, I see people, but they look like trees walking around. So Jesus is not alone. There are people witnessing this. And so he does it again. He lays hands on him again, and this time his vision is fully restored. Okay, it takes 2 tries at this, though. I think this is fascinating because I think Jesus does this on purpose. He knows his disciples are there. He knows the responses he's getting to this point. He's trying to sift and refine his followers and really teach them at this moment and prep them for what's about to happen to him and to his movement. It's going to get tough. And there's something deeply symbolic happening here too. So this isn't just about the blind man. It's about the disciples. So they've seen so much by now. They've seen miracles, they've seen feedings, teachings. Jesus has gone to battle against the forces of chaos in the form of the sea 2 times now, Matthew 8, Matthew 14. And he's defeated it both times. He's cast out demons. He's just completely rocked their world on so many levels, but they still don't see him clearly. They're like this man. They're partially healed, but still blurry. They see it, but they still don't, not clearly. And Jesus knows it. And rather than rush them to clarity, he continues to walk them through the process. I think sometimes understanding needs to happen in stages. You can't just expect understanding to happen all at once, but it needs to be a continual process. And I think that's a piece of it. And I think the other side of it is, as soon as you think that you understand it well enough, that's when Jesus says you don't get it. The disciples have started to get it. They declared him the Son of God, but they still don't get it. And I think that spiritual vision, it's not instant and it's not permanent. As soon as you think you know it all, you don't get it. If we believe in an eternal God, infinite, the second we have a grasp on him, or we think we do, the second we think we get it completely, that's the second we have missed the point. And that's part of the message Jesus is enacting in this healing. And I think he knows that with regard to his disciples, just like with us, it's not this instantaneous thing, this understanding. It's shaped by repeated encounters and small revelations and slowly letting go of what we think we know. Even when we're right, there's always more to know. And that process reaches a breaking point when Jesus leads them north to Caesarea Philippi. I think he chooses Caesarea Philippi because Caesarea Philippi is a Roman city and it's loaded with imperial symbolism. There's shrines to Caesar around, there's temples to Pan, the Roman god. It was a hotspot of Roman religious political power, exactly the kind of place that represents everything oppressive and idolatrous about the world they lived in. Okay? But it's also beautiful, but it also represents everything Jesus is against. It's here in the shadow of those altars where Jesus turns to his disciples and he asks them a pointed question. Remember this? Who do you say that I am? And the disciples fumble through some answers. Remember, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say one of the prophets. And in other words, they know Jesus is special, but they haven't put a finger on it yet. And then Peter steps up and he says this. Remember Peter? He says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." That's a breakthrough moment. Finally, one of them says it. Not just a healer, not just a prophet, not just a teacher, not just a master, not just rabbi, Messiah, Son of the living God. And Jesus affirms it. And then immediately, Jesus has to continue teaching. Because as soon as Peter thinks he's got it, that's the moment where Jesus realizing Peter doesn't get it still. Immediately Jesus starts redefining what all of this confession that Peter just proclaimed, what it actually means. So the very next thing he tells them is that the Son of Man must suffer, must be rejected, must be killed, and then he's going to rise from the dead. Okay? He starts to explain what this is, what that all means. This is what it means to be the Messiah, the anointed one of God. And this is where Peter, who a moment ago got it, had this aha moment, blessed by God. Yes, this is where Peter starts to collapse and misunderstand it. So one moment he's confessing Jesus as the Messiah. The next, he's pulling Jesus aside. This is in Matthew 16. And he's saying, hey, Jesus, suffering, no, I will never let you suffer. That's not going to happen. You might think that that's going to happen. I'm not going to let it happen. The point is that suffering doesn't fit Peter's framework for messianic victory. Suffering doesn't fit within that framework. Weakness doesn't fit within that framework. Suffering means you're losing, loss, losing, defeat. That doesn't fit within the way Peter understands the Messiah. Someone who's anointed by God doesn't lose. Someone who's anointed by God wins. Someone who's anointed by God is the victor, not the victim. And Jesus says, and he says, get behind me, Satan. And this is harsh, but it's very revealing. Peter isn't being malicious. He's being sincere. He's trying to protect Jesus. He's trying to protect the mission. He's trying to keep Jesus on a path to victory, to triumph. When we go and we storm the city and we take over Jerusalem, and we oust the Romans and we install God back in the temple. And in doing so, though, he's unknowingly echoing the same temptation that Jesus faced in the wilderness. Do you remember that at the beginning of Jesus's public campaign when he goes out into the wilderness for 40 days and he's confronted by Satan? Jesus was tempted by Satan to seize the crown without the cross, to have the power without the pain, to be given the keys to the kingdom by just stepping into the world's already established powers and power structures. And Jesus recognizes that voice for what it is in the words of Peter. And he knows that that's a distortion of who Jesus is as king and the nature of his kingdom. And he says, get behind me, Satan. And Jesus goes even further. He turns to the crowd and he just says it pretty clearly. If anyone wants to follow me, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. And this isn't a message that's going to garner a lot of positive followers. If I have a product I'm trying to sell, a health product that's guaranteed to make you less healthy, lead to suffering, that's not going to sell. The crowds are expecting Jesus to say something Messiah-like, king-like. Like, let's go fight Rome. Take up your sword and let's go kick them out of our house. But instead, he comes along and he says, take up your cross and follow me. And if you're not willing to do that, then you are not one of my followers. And the meaning of this is pretty intense, not for us, because we wear crosses on jewelry. We wear cross necklaces and earrings. And the cross for us has been sanitized, just like Jesus has been sanitized and spiritualized. Like the cross was spiritual. Jesus went and he died for my sins on the cross, and it's this symbol, and he really suffered on it. We admit that, and we talk about his physical suffering. But the cross in the ancient world was a brutal method, not only of putting someone to death, but of torture. And it was a tool that was used by empires to make sure that you know how strong we are and you don't mess around in our territory. And if you do, if you try to rise up against us, if you try to rebel, if you try to break our rules, you will end up on a cross. And Jesus is literally saying, hey, if you don't sacrifice yourself for my sake, you can't be one of my followers. Once again, Jesus is making the point clear. As soon as you think you have me figured out, you've missed it. And I think that's just the real theme of this entire scene, isn't it? The fire has been lit. Jesus is refining, he's purifying systems, boundaries, expectations, and even the disciples' understanding of who he is and what it means to follow him. Nothing shallow will survive the journey ahead. Jesus knows this. The scene, Luke mentions that at a certain point, he turns his face toward Jerusalem. He knows that the path from here on out ends in Jerusalem. And nothing that's in Jerusalem is going to be easy, not for him and not for his disciples. But in all of this, Jesus knows that what he's doing, his tactics, his demonstrations, his declarations are starting to work. He's starting to create this core with his disciples and those closest to him that's going to survive. I think he's starting to become more confident that even though they're going to falter at the end and they're going to abandon him when he goes and gets arrested and is put on the cross, and they're all going to scatter. But I think he understands that the bigger picture is starting to take shape, and that all of what he's doing is starting to work. It's one thing to call Jesus the Messiah, to believe in him, to believe that that's what he is. It's another thing to follow him when that Messiah walks straight to the cross. and demands that you and I take up our crosses like him and follow him. Peter's confession is more of a breakthrough, but it's not a finish line. It's not the end. He sees something that's true, but he doesn't quite get what that means. He says it, yeah, the confession, he gets that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of the living God, but he doesn't quite get what that means. And I think that's an issue that a lot of us are facing right now. We look at Jesus and we say the right things and we confess, yeah, he's the Messiah, he's the Son of God, he's the Christ, he's my Lord and Savior. And Jesus says, yes, you're right, you're blessed by God, but you missed the point. And I think a lot of us are stuck in that tension where we also know the verses. We know to take up your cross. We know to love your neighbor. We know to love your enemy. And the commands that Jesus gives us on what it looks like to follow him. And we're stuck in this tension. And I think Jesus is trying to move us situation by situation, encounter by encounter, scene by scene, from just saying it to understanding it. From just seeing trees walking around to seeing things clearly. And I wonder, the next time Jesus asks you or me, who do you say that I am? If we confess correctly, if we were to write down with pen and paper what we mean by that, what would that Jesus look like? What would it mean that we say Jesus is the Christ, Lord, Savior, Son of God? Leko Mod, go and learn. Come back for scene 17 of the JesusX30 challenge.